My stepmother kicked me out on my 18th birthday, saying all I'd inherited from the grandfather I never knew was a worthless hayloft. What I found inside wasn't just about the past. It was about a future I never knew I had. If you've ever felt like you were starting over with nothing, maybe this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, because we're going to talk about what it means to build a home from the ground up. The key felt cold in my hand, colder than the late October air that was already biting at my cheeks. It was an old-fashioned skeleton key, heavy and ornate, the kind you see in movies. It didn't look like it belonged in the 21st century, and it definitely didn't feel like it belonged to me. "That's it," Sharon said, her arms crossed tight over her chest. She stood in the doorway of the house I'd lived in for 10 years, the house my father had bought with her. Now he was gone, and the house was just hers. "The lawyer sent it over with the deed. It's yours. The property, the taxes, all of it." Her voice was flat, a carefully polished stone with no sharp edges, but it still cut. She wasn't being cruel, not in her mind. She was being practical. I was 18, an adult, no longer her legal or financial responsibility. My duffel bag was on a porch step beside me, packed with the few things that were unequivocally mine. 3 changes of clothes, a worn paperback my dad gave me, my phone, and a charger. The sum total of a childhood spent in the shadow of someone else's family. "A hayloft?" I'd asked her an hour earlier, when she first slid the thick manila envelope across the kitchen table. The table where my dad and I used to do homework. The table where she told me he wasn't coming home from the hospital. "My grandfather left me a hayloft?" Sharon had sighed, a little puff of air that said this was all very tedious. "Technically, it's a barn on a 1/4 acre of land, unincorporated county land up in Northridge. Your father's father, Arthur. He passed about 6 months before your dad. The estate is just now being settled. It's all in the paperwork." I looked from the key in my palm to her face, searching for something. A flicker of sympathy, maybe. A hint of shared loss. My dad was her husband, after all. But her expression was a locked door. All she wanted was for me to walk through a different one, the one behind me, and close it for good. "There's a bus that leaves from the terminal downtown at 8, she said, glancing at her watch. "It'll get you to Clayton, which is the closest town. From there, I guess you can get a taxi." She didn't offer me a ride to the terminal. She didn't offer me cash for the bus or the taxi. She had given me what the law required, the key and the deed. Her duty was done. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. The 2 years since my dad's diagnosis had been a slow, grueling education in not asking for things you knew you wouldn't receive. I learned to make myself smaller, quieter. I learned to read the subtle shifts in atmosphere that meant it was better to be in my room than in the living room. I learned that grief doesn't always bring people together. Sometimes it's a wedge that drives them apart until you're standing on opposite sides of a chasm. I finally looked down at the key again, then closed my fingers around it. It was real. A real object that connected me to a real place. A place that was mine. It didn't matter that it was a worthless hayloft. It was the first thing in my entire life that was solely, legally mine. "Okay," I said, my own voice sounding distant. I slung the duffel bag over my shoulder. The strap dug into my neck. I didn't look back at her. I walked down the 3 concrete steps, down the walkway my dad had paved one sunny Saturday, and onto the sidewalk. I heard the door click shut behind me. The sound was so final, so absolute. It was the period at the end of a long, sad chapter. The October wind was relentless, carrying the scent of rain and dying leaves. I pulled up the collar of my thin jacket and started walking toward the distant glow of the downtown lights. I had a key, I had a deed, and I had a bus to catch. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a text from my one friend, maybe, wishing me a happy birthday. But it was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello? Is this Leo Vance? The voice was a woman's, calm and professional. Yes, I said, my own voice tight. This is Eleanor Albright. I'm the attorney for the estate of Arthur Vance. I was just calling to confirm you received the package from Ms. Miller. Sharon's maiden name, of course. You mean my stepmother, I said, the words tasting like rust. Yes. Did you receive the deed and the key? I did, I said, looking at the old key again as if it might explain something. Good. I'm legally obligated to inform you that the property comes with some liabilities. There are 2 years of outstanding property taxes due. It's not a tremendous amount, but it will need to be settled within the next 90 days to avoid a lien. Of course, even a worthless hayloft had a price. How much? I asked. She told me the number. It wasn't tremendous to a lawyer, maybe, but to an 18-year-old with $47 in his pocket, it might as well have been $1 million. Right, I said. Thank you for letting me know. One other thing, Mr. Vance, she said, her tone shifting slightly. I've had 2 calls this week from a representative of a firm called North Ridge Development. They're very interested in acquiring the parcel. They made a cash offer. Hope, sharp and stupid, pierced through the fog of my numbness. Money. An offer? How much? $5,000, she said. I stopped walking. $5,000. That was enough for a security deposit on an apartment, enough for a used car, enough to not be standing on a street corner in the cold with nowhere to go. It was a lifeline. They said the structure on the property is a teardown, Ms. Albright continued, her voice neutral. The offer is for the land value only. They're buying up a lot of the unincorporated parcels in that area. Their offer is, in my opinion, quite low. But it is an offer. I can forward you their contact information if you're interested. Why is it low? I asked, the journalist's son in me kicking in. My dad always said to ask the next question. Because they want it, she said simply. And they're hoping you're desperate enough to take the first number they throw at you. It's your decision, of course. My duty is only to inform you. The property is yours to do with as you see fit. Desperate. She had no idea. Or maybe she had every idea. Maybe that's what all this paperwork and legal talk boiled down to. A measurement of a person's desperation. I'll think about it, I said. Thank you, Ms. Albright. You have my number if you need anything, Leo, she said, her voice softening for the first time. Happy birthday. She hung up. Happy birthday. I stood there for a long moment, the traffic hissing past me on the wet street. $5,000. I could take the money. I could find a room to rent, get a job, and never, ever have to think about my father's family or some forgotten barn again. I could be free. But then I looked at the key in my hand. My grandfather, Arthur. A man I knew only as a ghost, a source of hushed arguments between my parents late at night. My dad had been estranged from him for reasons I never understood. But he had left this for me. Not for my dad, who was still alive when Arthur passed. For me. Why? Why leave a broken-down barn to a grandson you've never met? It made no sense. And selling it, sight unseen, for a lowball offer from some faceless developer. It felt wrong. It felt like a betrayal, though I wasn't sure of what or whom. I started walking again, faster this time. The bus terminal was 10 blocks away. I had a decision to make, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I couldn't make it here. I had to go there. I had to see it. I had to stand in the one place on earth that was mine and figure out what, if anything, was worth saving. The bus groaned and rattled its way out of the city, leaving the familiar constellation of streetlights behind for the vast, dark emptiness of the highway. I had a window seat, and I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, watching the world I knew dissolve into a blur of motion. The bus smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. A few other passengers were scattered throughout the seats, their faces illuminated by the pale blue light of their phones. Each of them was in their own little world, and I was in mine. A world that had shrunk to the size of a duffel bag and a single, heavy key. The $47 I had was now $32, after buying the one-way ticket to Clayton. The trip would take 4 hours. 4 hours to sit and think. But I didn't want to think. Thinking meant remembering Sharon's face, the finality of the closing door. It meant replaying the phone call with the lawyer, the words, "outstanding taxes," and "tear down," echoing in my head. It meant thinking about my dad and the hole he'd left in the world. A hole so big it felt like it had swallowed me whole. So I tried not to think. I focused on the landscape outside. The neat rows of suburban houses gave way to strip malls, then to fields, dark and fallow under a sliver of moon. We passed skeletal trees, their bare branches reaching for the sky like gnarled fingers. Every few miles, a lone farmhouse would appear, a warm yellow square of light in the immense darkness, and I felt a pang of something I couldn't name. It was a feeling of being outside of everything, a ghost moving through a world of warm, solid things. Home. That's what those lights were. People were inside, eating dinner, watching TV, living their lives. I was just passing through. My grandfather, Arthur. I tried to picture him. My dad had a single, faded photograph of him in a box of old papers. It was from the army, it looked like. A young man with my dad's eyes and a jawline that was all his own, staring seriously at the camera. He wasn't smiling. He was a complicated man, was all my dad would ever say. And my mom, before she got sick, would just shake her head. Your father loved him, but he couldn't save him. Save him from what? I never knew. The arguments I'd overheard were always fragmented. He can't come here, Sarah, my dad would plead. You don't understand what he's mixed up in. And then, it's not his fault, it's the life he was dealt. It was a story with all the middle pages torn out. Now, it seemed, I had inherited the final, cryptic chapter. The bus engine droned on, a monotonous lullaby. My thoughts drifted back to the developer's offer, $5,000. It was a concrete number in a world that had become terrifyingly abstract. It was an escape hatch. Ms. Albright said the offer was low because they wanted it. What was it? A quarter-acre of dirt and a collapsing barn? Why would a development company care about such a tiny, worthless-seeming plot of land? My dad taught me to be skeptical of easy answers. If something seems too good to be true, it is, he'd say. And if someone's rushing you to make a decision, it's because they don't want you to have time to think. The developer was rushing me. Sharon was rushing me. The tax deadline was rushing me. Everything was pushing me toward the easy answer. Take the money. Maybe that was the test. Maybe my grandfather, this ghost I'd never met, had set up one final, posthumous lesson for his bloodline. A test of character. Or maybe I was just a tired, broke kid on a bus, trying to invent meaning where there was none. Maybe it really was just a worthless hayloft. The bus hit a pothole, and the jolt sent my head knocking against the window. I sat up, rubbing the spot. Across the aisle, a man in a worn-out trucker hat was asleep, his mouth slightly open. He looked peaceful. I envied him. I pulled out my phone and looked at the map. Northridge. It wasn't even a town, just a name for a region of wooded hills and winding country roads. Clayton was the closest dot, a small one. The deed had a plot number and a road name. 1140 Sparrow Creek Lane. The name sounded bucolic, like something from a painting. I imagined a little lane winding through a forest, leading to a charmingly rustic barn. It was a nice fantasy. It kept the fear at bay for a few minutes. I thought about the money again. If I took it, what then? I'd have a small cushion. I could find a cheap room for rent, probably. Get a job at a fast food place or a warehouse. I was 18. I had no skills, no diploma yet, no references. I'd be starting from absolute zero. But I'd be on my own, independent. Wasn't that the goal? But the key in my pocket felt heavier. It was more than a key. It was a question. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the answer was important. The bus slowed, its air brakes hissing, and pulled into a small, brightly lit gas station. 10 minutes, the driver called out, his voice gravelly. I didn't have money to buy anything, but I got out anyway, just to stretch my legs. The air was colder here, cleaner. The sky was a vast, dark blanket, pricked with 1,000,000 tiny, brilliant stars. More stars than I'd ever seen in the city. I looked up at them, feeling impossibly small. For a second, I felt a wave of pure panic. What was I doing? I was in the middle of nowhere, heading to an even more remote nowhere, chasing a ghost. I should have taken the money. I should call the lawyer right now and tell her to accept the offer. But my hand went to my pocket, and my fingers closed around the key again. Its solid, metallic reality was an anchor in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. It was a promise I had to keep, even if I didn't know who I'd made it to. I got back on the bus. I still had 2 hours to go. 2 hours until I reached Clayton and whatever came next. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, a faint gray smear against the black, when the bus finally rolled into Clayton. The town was little more than a single main street with a blinking traffic light, a diner, a hardware store, and a few other dark storefronts. It was quiet. The kind of profound quiet that feels like a presence, not an absence. I was the only one who got off. The bus hissed and pulled away, its red taillights disappearing around a bend, leaving me alone in the pre-dawn chill. A single taxi was parked in front of the diner, its driver slumped over the wheel, asleep. I tapped on the window. He jolted awake, a man with a kind, tired face and a mess of gray hair. "You need a ride?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. 1140 Sparrow Creek Lane, I said. He blinked at me. "Sparrow Creek? Out past the old mill? There's nothing out there." "There's a barn," I said, "supposedly." He shrugged. "Your money." He popped the trunk and I threw my duffel bag in. The ride was another 15 minutes, first on paved roads that quickly turned to gravel. The landscape was beautiful in a stark, rugged way. Rolling hills covered in dense forest, a low mist clinging to the hollows. We passed a collapsing stone wall, then the ruins of what the driver called the old mill. Finally, he slowed down and pointed. "That's Sparrow Creek Lane. he said. It wasn't a lane. It was 2 dirt ruts disappearing into a thicket of overgrown pine trees. You sure this is it? Deed says so, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He grunted and turned onto the path. The taxi's undercarriage scraped against the high ground between the ruts. Branches screeched along the sides of the car. After about 100 yards, the path opened into a small, circular clearing. And there it was. It wasn't a charmingly rustic barn from a painting. It was a hulking gray shadow against the dawn sky. It was bigger than I'd imagined, 2 stories tall, with a steep, sagging roof and weathered siding from which most of the paint had long since peeled. The large sliding doors on the front were shut tight, and a smaller, man-sized door was set into the side. Weeds and small saplings grew right up to the foundation. It didn't look worthless. It looked forgotten, forsaken. "This is it," the driver said, a note of disbelief in his voice. "Well, good luck." The ride cost me $12. I had $20 left. I stood there as the taxi carefully backed its way down the dirt track, the sound of its engine fading until it was gone. And then there was only the sound of the wind in the pines and the frantic beating of my own heart. I was here. I was alone. I walked slowly toward the barn, my boots crunching on the gravelly soil. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth. As I got closer, I could see the details. The hinges on the big doors were rusted solid. A few windows on the second floor, the hayloft, were boarded up, but one was broken, a dark, gaping hole. It looked like a place with secrets. I walked to the smaller door on the side. The wood was swollen and warped. The doorknob was gone, leaving just a hole. Above it was a heavy-duty deadbolt lock, tarnished but solid. I pulled the key from my pocket. My hand was trembling slightly. I slid the key into the lock. It resisted at first, gritty with rust and disuse. I jiggled it, pushed harder, and then, with a deep, grating clunk, the tumblers turned. The sound echoed in the morning silence. I took a deep breath and pulled the door. It scraped against the frame, protesting loudly, but it opened. The air that washed over me was thick and heavy. The smell of ancient dust, dry hay, and something else, something metallic and oily, like a long-abandoned workshop. I stepped inside. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust to the gloom. Light filtered in through cracks in the siding and the single broken window high above, illuminating swirling dust motes in hazy shafts. The ground floor was a vast, open space. To the left, there were empty animal stalls, their wooden gates hanging crookedly. To the right, the space was filled with old, shrouded shapes. Tarps covered what looked like farm equipment, lumps of metal that had been sitting for a very long time. In the center of the room, a heavy wooden staircase led up to the second floor, the hayloft. At the back of the barn, underneath the loft, was a long, sturdy-looking workbench. It was covered in a thick layer of dust, but I could see tools hanging on a pegboard behind it. Wrenches, saws, hammers, all neatly arranged, all coated in the same pale grime. It was the most organized part of the entire barn. It felt different, used, cared for. I walked over to it, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. I ran a finger across the workbench, leaving a clean streak in the dust. Underneath, the wood was smooth and worn. This was where someone had worked. My grandfather? I looked at the tools on the wall. They weren't farm tools. They were mechanics' tools. My dad had been a mechanic before he met my mom. He'd loved working with his hands. Had he learned it here? From the man he never spoke of? A wave of dizziness washed over me. It was too much. The journey, the lack of sleep, the sheer, overwhelming reality of this place. I leaned against the workbench, my head in my hands. What was I doing here? This wasn't a home. It was a tomb, a monument to decay. Sharon was right. The developer was right. It was a teardown. I should have taken the $5,000. I pushed myself off the bench, my frustration turning to a kind of reckless anger. I kicked at an old wooden crate near the stairs. It splintered, spilling out a cascade of rusty nails. It didn't make me feel any better. I was about to turn and walk out, to go back to Clayton and call the lawyer and just be done with it all, when my foot hit something that didn't move. I looked down. My boot had scuffed the dusty floorboards right in front of the workbench, and in the disturbed dust, I saw it. A line, a perfectly straight, unnatural line in the wood. It was the edge of a floorboard that had been cut. It was almost invisible, but now that I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. My heart started hammering again, this time not with fear, but with something else, a hunter's focus. I knelt down, my knees cracking in the cold. I ran my fingers along the line. It was a seam. I looked for a handle, a notch, anything. There was nothing. I pushed on the board, but it was solid. I tried to pry at the edge with my fingernails, but the fit was too tight. I stood up and looked at the tool wall. My eyes scanned the dusty outlines. Saws, hammers, wrenches, and then I saw it. Tucked behind a larger wrench was a small, flat pry bar. It was cleaner than the other tools, the metal less tarnished. I reached for it. It felt solid in my hand. I knelt back down, wedged the tip of the pry bar into the thin seam, and leaned on it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan of protesting wood, the board lifted. It wasn't just one board. It was a small, square trapdoor, about 2 feet by 2 feet. My breath caught in my throat. I lifted it all the way up and set it aside. Below it was a dark, square cavity, and nestled inside that cavity was a metal box. It was an old military-style ammunition can, painted olive drab, with a heavy latch on the front. It wasn't locked. My hands were shaking now, for real. This was it. This was the reason, the secret. Whatever it was in this box. I reached down, my fingers closing around the cold metal handle, and I lifted it out. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been. I set it on the workbench, the metal clanging loudly in the silence. I wiped the dust from the lid with my sleeve. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Every instinct was screaming at me to open it. But I was also terrified. The truth is a heavy thing. My dad used to say that. Sometimes it's a weight that crushes you. I thought of Ms. Albright's voice. The offer is, in my opinion, quite low. Why? Why was this worthless quarter-acre worth more than $5,000? The answer, I knew, was probably in this box. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I reached out and flipped the latch. It sprang open with a sharp, metallic snap. I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was paper. The box was filled with thick, cream-colored envelopes, each one sealed with wax and numbered in neat black ink. There were at least a dozen of them. And underneath the envelopes, there was something else. A smaller box, made of steel, with a keyhole lock. It was a cash box, a heavy one, but there was no key. My eyes went back to the envelopes. The one on top was numbered 1. I picked it up. The paper was thick and expensive feeling. On the front, in the same neat script, was a single word. Leo. My name. It felt like a jolt of electricity. This wasn't just a discovery. This was a message meant for me. I used the pry bar to slit the envelope open, my fingers clumsy. Inside was a folded letter, several pages long. I unfolded it. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope, precise, controlled, a little old-fashioned. I started to read. My dearest Leo, it began. If you are reading this, then it means several things have happened. It means I am gone. It means your father is gone. And it means you have found your way here, to the last place on earth that is truly ours. For all of this, I am more sorry than words can say. I had to stop and take a breath. The voice in the letter felt so present, so real. It was like he was standing right there in the dusty barn with me. I read on. My name is Arthur Vance, and I am your grandfather. I know you have never met me. I know you have likely heard nothing good about me. Your father, my son Daniel, loved me, but he was also afraid of me, and for me. He had good reason. I have not been a part of your life for one reason, and one reason only: to protect you. Protect me from what? The question screamed in my mind. The world is a complicated place, Leo. When I was a young man, much younger than you are now, I fell in with the wrong people. Not criminals in the way you see on television. These were men in suits. Men who bought and sold land, who moved money, who built empires on foundations of threats and broken promises. I was a mechanic, a good one. I kept their cars running. But I was also smart, and I started doing other things for them. Moving packages, listening. I learned how their world worked, and I wanted out. I sat down on an old wooden stool, the pages of the letter trembling in my hand. This was the story my father never told me. Getting out was not simple, the letter continued. They don't just let you walk away. I spent years trying to untangle myself, to build a life for my family, for your father, that was clean. This barn, this land, this was my escape, my fortress. I bought it with clean money, the first I ever made. But they found me. They always find you. They didn't want me. They wanted leverage. They threatened your father, who was just a boy then. And I had to make a choice. I could almost hear the arguments my parents had, my dad's desperate voice. He can't come here, Sarah. He wasn't protecting us from his father. He was protecting his father from being found. I made a deal, Arthur wrote. I would disappear. I would give them information I had on a rival of theirs, and in exchange, they would leave my son alone. Forever. I would never contact him. I would never see him or his family. I would become a ghost. It was the only way to ensure he would be safe, that he could grow up and have a normal life. A life I could never have. I had to put the letter down. Tears were blurring the words. I wasn't crying for the grandfather I never knew. I was crying for my dad. For the lifetime of pain he must have carried, believing his own father had abandoned him, when all along it was a sacrifice. A brutal, lonely, impossible sacrifice. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve and picked up the letter again. There was more. I kept my promise. I watched your father from a distance. I saw him become a good man, a better man than me. I saw him meet your mother. I saw when you were born, and it was the proudest and most painful day of my life. I knew I had made the right choice. This barn is more than a barn, Leo. It is a vault. It is a history. In the other envelopes, you will find the rest of the story. You will also find instructions. The world has changed, but the people I knew have not. Their organization has grown. They are legitimate now, a corporation. They are called Northridge Development. My blood ran cold. The developer, the one who wanted to buy the land. They weren't just a company. They were them. They don't know what's here, the letter said. They think this is just a forgotten piece of land, owned by a dead old man. They want it because it's the last parcel they need to control the whole valley. But they are cautious. They will not take it by force. They will try to buy it from the heir, from you. They will assume you are young, ignorant, and desperate. They will offer you a pittance, $5,000 perhaps? I let out a shaky, humorless laugh. He knew. He knew everything. In this box, there is another box. The key to that box is hidden where I did my best work. Look for where the spark meets the steel. Inside that box is $100,000 in cash. It is clean money. I saved it for you over 30 years. It is your fresh start. You can take it, and you can disappear. You can build a new life, far away from here, and never look back. There would be no shame in that. It is the gift I always wanted to give my son. $100,000. The number was incomprehensible. It was freedom. It was a new identity. It was everything I didn't have. There is another option, the letter concluded. It is the harder path. It is the path I was never strong enough to take. In the final envelope, number 12, there is a ledger. It contains names, account numbers, dates. It is the proof of everything they have ever done. It is enough to dismantle their entire enterprise. If you choose this path, they will fight you. It will be dangerous. But it will also be justice. It will clear my name and your father's. It will reclaim our family's honor. The choice is yours, Leo. Freedom or justice. Escape or legacy. Whatever you choose, know that I have loved you every single day of your life. Your grandfather, Arthur. I folded the letter, my hands numb. I sat there in the dusty, silent barn. The weight of my grandfather's entire life settled squarely on my shoulders. I was 18 years old. I was homeless, and I had just been given a choice that could define not only my future, but the past as well. The world outside the barn had vanished. My entire universe had contracted to this dusty space, to the metal box on the workbench, and the impossible choice laid out in the pages of a dead man's letter. I felt a deep, gut-wrenching wave of emotion. Grief for my father, who never knew the truth. Grief for this grandfather, this stranger who had sacrificed everything. And a profound, terrifying sense of being utterly and completely alone with this knowledge. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where everything you thought you knew about your life, your family, your past, was completely rewritten in an instant. It feels like the ground beneath your feet has turned to sand. You don't know which way is up. If you've ever been through something like that, if you've ever had to face a truth that changed everything, let me know in the comments below. We build this community by sharing these stories, by reminding each other that we're not alone in these moments. You're not alone. I sat there for what felt like hours, just holding the first letter. The sun had risen higher, and the shafts of light cutting through the gloom were brighter now, illuminating the chaos and decay of the barn in stark detail. $100,000. The number pulsed in my brain. It was an answer to every immediate problem I had. I could pay the back taxes on the property with pocket change. I could buy a car, rent an apartment in a city far away from here, enroll in community college, get a degree, build a life. A quiet, safe, anonymous life. It was everything Arthur wanted for my dad. It was the gift he was now offering me. All I had to do was find the key. Where the spark meets the steel, he'd written. I stood up and walked back to the workbench. My eyes scanned the area. What did that mean? A welder? A grinder? My gaze fell on an old bench grinder mounted at the far end of the bench. It was ancient, a heavy cast-iron body with 2 stone wheels. It was coated in dust, but the steel safety guards around the wheels were cleaner, as if they'd been handled more recently. The spark meets the steel. This is where you'd sharpen tools, where you'd see a shower of sparks as metal was ground away. I ran my hand along the underside of the grinder's mounting plate. Nothing. I felt along the back, tracing the thick, frayed power cord. Nothing. I looked closer at the steel guard over the right-hand wheel. It was held in place by 3 bolts. 2 of them were rusted and grimy. The third one was different. The head of the bolt was cleaner, the edges sharper. It looked newer. I searched the tool wall and found a wrench that looked like the right size. I fitted over the bolt. It turned. Easily. Too easily. The other 2 would have been frozen solid with rust. I unscrewed the bolt completely. It was shorter than it should have been. It wasn't a bolt. It was a plug. I pulled the steel guard away from the machine, and there, tucked into a hollowed-out cavity behind it, was a small, flat brass key. It was attached to a simple metal tag. On the tag, 1 word was stamped: home. My hands were steady now. The fear was gone, replaced by a strange, cold calm. I walked back to the ammo can and took out the steel cash box. The key slid into the lock perfectly. I turned it. A solid click echoed in the barn. I lifted the lid. It was full of cash. Stacks of $100 bills, neatly bundled with paper bands. It wasn't messy or illicit looking. It was organized. It was a savings account, a lifetime of careful, patient work. I picked up a stack. The paper was crisp. It felt unreal. This was my escape hatch, my ticket to anywhere. I could walk out of this barn right now and never look back. I could leave the letters, leave the ledger, leave the whole complicated, painful story behind me. I could honor my grandfather's first wish, that I be safe, that I be free. I put the stack of money back in the box and closed the lid. I didn't lock it. Then I looked at the other envelopes, still in the ammo can, numbered 2 through 12. The rest of the story. The harder path. Why would he even give me the choice? If safety was all he wanted for me, why include the ledger? Why tell me about the other option at all? My dad's voice echoed in my memory, from a time he was helping me with a history paper. People are complicated, he'd said, looking at a picture of some flawed historical hero. They do the wrong things for the right reasons. They make sacrifices they regret. The best you can do is try to understand their choices, and then make your own. My grandfather had made his choice, a choice born of fear and love. He had lived a life of lonely exile to protect his son. But in the end, he hadn't just left me money. He had left me the truth. He had left me the whole story, and with it, the chance to write a different ending. To not run, to not hide, to stand and fight. Taking the money was his plan. But what was mine? I picked up the envelope marked 2 and opened it. This letter was different. It was less personal, more factual. It detailed his early years with the organization, the names of the founding partners, one of whom was the father of the current CEO of Northridge Development. It described the specific crimes he had witnessed: blackmail, extortion, arson disguised as accidents. It was a confession and an indictment all at once. I read through letter after letter. With each one, a piece of the puzzle clicked into place. He explained how they laundered money through land deals, buying up worthless-seeming parcels through shell companies, then getting them rezoned and selling them for massive profits. This valley, Northridge, was their magnum opus, a multi-decade project, and my quarter-acre, my worthless plot, was the final linchpin. Because of its location, it controlled the water rights for the entire western half of the valley. Without it, their development plans were crippled. The land wasn't worth $5,000. It was probably worth millions to them. This wasn't just a land grab, it was the culmination of a criminal empire's life's work, and I was standing in the middle of it. I finally reached the last envelope, number 12. It was thicker than the others. I opened it. Inside wasn't a letter. It was a small black ledger book, the kind accountants used to use. I opened it. The pages were filled with my grandfather's same neat, precise script. But this was just numbers, columns of them, dates, account numbers, routing numbers, and names. It was a detailed record of every dirty transaction he was aware of, tracing the money from its illegal origins to its supposedly legitimate destinations. It was a roadmap to their destruction. Tucked into the back of the ledger was a final, single sheet of paper, a short note. "Leo," it said, "this book is the truth. The money is your life. I could not choose for you. Only you can decide what a life is worth. Your father was the best of me. Be the best of both of us. Arthur." I closed the ledger. I looked at the cash box, a promise of a simple, easy future. Then I looked at the ledger, a promise of a difficult, dangerous one. And in that moment, the choice wasn't hard at all. Running was my grandfather's story. It was a story of sacrifice and pain, and I would honor it. But it wouldn't be my story. My father had lived a good, honest life, a life kept clean by his own father's exile. He had been a mechanic, a husband, a father. He had built a life on the foundation Arthur had given him. Now, it was my turn to build something. Taking the money and running felt like leaving a debt unpaid. A debt of honor. A debt to the father who never knew the truth, and to the grandfather who had paid for it with his entire life. I picked up my phone. I had 1 bar of service. I scrolled through my contacts and found the number for Eleanor Albright. I hesitated for a second, then hit call. She answered on the second ring. "Ms. Albright? It's Leo Vance." "Leo," she said, her voice sharp with attention. "Have you been to the property?" "I'm here now," I said, my voice steady. "I've decided not to accept the developer's offer." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Okay," she said slowly. "May I ask why?" "Because it's worth more," I said, "and because it's my home." It was the first time I'd said it out loud, and the word felt solid. Real. "I want to pay the back taxes, and I need to hire you. I think Northridge Development has been engaged in criminal activity for decades, and I have the proof." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I could hear her thinking. I could picture her sitting in her leather chair, her calm, pragmatic mind processing this insane declaration from an 18-year-old kid in a barn. "Leo," she said finally, her voice very, very careful, "that is an extremely serious allegation. What kind of proof are you talking about?" "The kind that belongs in a ledger," I said, quoting my grandfather. "The kind that my grandfather, Arthur Vance, left for me to find." I didn't tell her about the money. That was my leverage, my insurance policy. But I told her enough. I told her about the letters, about the history, about the connection between the company and my family's past. I talked for 10 minutes straight, my voice echoing in the vast, empty barn. When I was finished, she didn't say anything for a long time. "Ms. Albright, are you there?" "I'm here, Leo," she said, and her voice was different. The professional reserve was gone. There was a new note in it, a steely resolve. Don't touch anything else. Don't talk to anyone. I'm going to make some calls. I have a colleague, a forensic accountant, who I trust implicitly. We're going to handle this carefully. Where can I meet you? Here, I said, at the barn. I'll be there tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Until then, stay put and stay quiet. And Leo? Yeah? You're doing the right thing. After the call, a sense of profound calm settled over me. The choice was made. The pieces were in motion. The consequences would come, but for the first time since my dad died, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. I spent the rest of the day in a flurry of activity. I wasn't just waiting, I was starting. I took one stack of $100 bills from the cash box. $2,000. I put the rest of the cash, along with all the letters and the ledger, back into the ammo can. I closed it, latched it, and put it back in the hidden compartment under the floor. I replaced the trap door. It was safer there than anywhere else. Then I started to clean. It was a massive, overwhelming task, but I needed to do something physical. I needed to pour my energy, my fear, my hope into work. I found a push broom and started with the area around the workbench. I swept away years of dust and grime, revealing the strong, oil-stained wood of the floorboards. The air filled with the smell of disturbed history. I opened the large sliding doors, which took all my strength to budge, groaning on their rusty tracks. Sunlight and fresh, cold air flooded the cavernous space, chasing the shadows from the corners. It was like the barn was taking its first breath in a generation. I worked until my arms ached and my t-shirt was soaked with sweat despite the chill. I cleared the old rotted tarps off the equipment. Underneath was a rusty but solid-looking old tractor, a plow, and a hay baler, relics of a life my grandfather had tried to build. As dusk began to fall, I walked into Clayton. It was a 2-mile walk, but it felt good to be moving. The $20 I had left was just enough for a meal. I went to the diner I'd seen that morning. It was warm inside, smelling of coffee and fried onions. A handful of locals were scattered at the counter and in booths. They all looked up when I came in, the way people in small towns do. I slid into a booth and ordered a burger and fries from a waitress with a friendly, tired smile. While I ate the best-tasting meal of my life, I overheard snippets of conversation. Talk of the weather, of high school football, of someone's new truck. It was normal. It was a world away from ledgers and criminal conspiracies. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost passing through. I felt like I was on the edge of it, about to step in. I walked back to the barn in the dark, my stomach full, the $2,000 from the box tucked securely in my pocket. The barn was a dark silhouette against the starry sky. It didn't look menacing anymore. It looked like a promise. That night, I slept in the hayloft. There was still old, dry hay up there, piled in a corner. It smelled sweet. I made a mound of it, used my duffel bag as a pillow, and pulled my jacket over me like a blanket. Through the broken window, I could see the stars. I thought about my father. I thought about Arthur. I thought about the two of them, separated by a choice made out of love and fear. I thought about how my dad had built a life, and how my grandfather had built this fortress to protect it. And now it was my turn. I was building something too. Not just a legal case, not just a home. I was building a bridge back to them. I was taking the legacy of the mechanic and the exile, the honest man and the man who lived in shadows, and I was making it whole. The next morning, I used the money from the box. I took the bus back to the nearest county seat, a larger town about an hour away. I walked into the tax assessor's office, a sterile government building that smelled of old paper and weak coffee. I walked up to the counter and paid the 2 years of back taxes on parcel number 734, Sparrow Creek Lane, in cash. The clerk looked at the $100 bills with suspicion, but they were legal tender. She gave me a receipt. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt as heavy and as important as the deed itself. With that simple transaction, the property was secure. It was mine, free and clear. The developer couldn't force a tax sale. The first move was mine. I got back to the barn just before 10 a.m. A sensible dark blue sedan was pulling up the dirt track. Eleanor Albright got out. She was older than her voice suggested, maybe in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense haircut. She wore a practical pantsuit. She looked at the barn, then at me, and a small, wry smile touched her lips. "So this is it," she said. "This is home," I replied. We spent the next 2 hours in the loft. I had brought the ledger up, but not the cash box. I laid out the story, using my grandfather's letters as a guide. She listened intently, taking notes, her face a mask of professional concentration. She read passages from the letters, her eyes scanning the pages. She examined the ledger, her expression growing more and more grim. "He wasn't exaggerating," she said finally, looking up from the little black book. "This is meticulous. Dates, accounts. This is a prosecutor's dream, if it can be corroborated." "Can it?" I asked. "That's what my colleague will find out," she said. "This is my field, but the financial forensics are his. If these accounts are real, he'll find them." She looked at me, her gaze steady and serious. "Leo, you understand what you're doing, right? These are not nice people. They will not just roll over." "I know," I said. "My grandfather spent his whole life running from them. My dad spent his whole life with a hole in it because of them. I'm not going to run." She nodded slowly. "Good, because if we do this, we do it all the way." She explained the next steps. We would make a copy of the ledger. The original would be placed in a secure bank vault. Her colleague would begin the process of tracing the funds. It would be slow. It would be quiet. We wouldn't go to the authorities until we had an airtight, undeniable case. "In the meantime," she said, "you need to live. What are your plans?" "I'm staying here," I said. "I'm going to fix this place up." She raised an eyebrow. "You know how to do that?" "I'll learn," I said. "My dad was a mechanic. My grandfather built this place. It's in the blood, I guess." She smiled, a genuine one this time. "All right, Leo Vance, let's get to work." The days that followed settled into a rhythm. The legal battle was happening somewhere else, in quiet offices and on secure servers. My battle was here, with the barn itself. I used the money Arthur had left me, but I was careful. I bought lumber, tools, a new generator for power. I spent my days working. I learned how to replace rotted siding, how to frame a wall, how to glaze a window. I bought books on carpentry and electrical wiring. I watched videos on my phone at night, huddled by the light of a battery-powered lantern. I made mistakes. I hit my thumb with a hammer. I cut a board too short more times than I could count. But every small victory, every new window that let in the light, every replaced board that made the structure stronger, felt like a victory against the past. It felt like I was healing the building, and it was healing me. I became a regular at the hardware store in Clayton. The owner, a gruff old man named George, started off suspicious of the city kid buying up tools. But as the weeks went on, he saw that I was serious. He started giving me advice, showing me the right way to hold a saw, telling me which nails wouldn't split the old wood. One day, he came out to the barn himself, just to see the project. He walked around, grunting his approval. "Your granddad was a hell of a builder," he said, slapping a massive support beam. "Built this to last." "I'm trying to," I said. He nodded. "You're doing good, kid." It was the highest praise I had ever received. I was no longer an outsider. I was the kid fixing up the old Vance place. I was becoming part of the town's story. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. Winter arrived, blanketing the valley in snow. The barn was no longer drafty. I had installed a wood stove, and the main floor was warm and bright. The workbench was clean, the tools organized. I had turned one of the old animal stalls into a small, livable room with a bed and a desk. It was my home. A home I had built with my own hands. One evening in January, I got a call from Ms. Albright. Her voice was electric. "We got it, Leo," she said. "The forensic team found the primary offshore account. It matches the ledger. It's the main artery. We have them." I felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees. "What happens now?" "Now," she said, "we give them a choice. They can face federal prosecution and lose everything. Or they can make things right. A full restitution fund for their victims, a public dissolution of the company, and a transfer of all Northridge land holdings to a county trust for conservation." "And the land," I said. "My land." "Your land stays yours," she said. "They'll have to buy the water rights from you at fair market value, which, given the circumstances, will be a very, very high value. You're going to be a very wealthy young man, Leo." Wealthy. The word sounded strange. I looked around the barn, at the clean floors and the solid walls, and the warm glow of the stove. I was already rich. The next week, the CEO of Northridge Development, the son of the man who had tormented my grandfather, quietly signed the agreement. There were no headlines, no dramatic courtroom scenes. It was all handled with the quiet, devastating efficiency of the law. They chose silence over exposure. They vanished, just like my grandfather had been forced to. My inheritance wasn't the money from the developer, though it was a life-changing amount. It wasn't even the $100,000 in the cash box, which I put into a trust. My real inheritance was the barn. It was the story held in its walls. It was the truth, finally brought into the light. It was the chance to reclaim a name and build a future. I stayed. I finished the barn, turning the massive hayloft into a beautiful, open living space with huge windows that looked out over the valley, a valley that would now be preserved forever. I enrolled in online classes, studying architecture and design. The barn wasn't just my home. It became my first project, my life's work. I often think about the choice Arthur gave me: freedom or justice, escape or legacy. He thought they were two different paths. But what I learned, standing in that dusty, forgotten place, is that sometimes they are the same. True freedom isn't about running away from your past. It's about facing it. It's about understanding it, and then building your own future right on top of it. Home isn't something you're given or a place you find. It's something you build, board by board, choice by choice. It's the place where your story makes sense. If this story meant something to you, if it helped you think about your own story in a new way, please consider subscribing to the channel. This is a community for people who understand that the hardest parts of our lives are often what make us who we are. and I want you to know that your story matters. In the comments below, tell me one thing, big or small, that you are building in your life right now. I read every single one. Thank you for listening.